Young farmer bought an old car at the auction. Imagine finding, among forgotten junk, an object capable of changing the destiny of an entire community. Don't skip this video. What began as a simple stroll through a fair transformed the life of a humble farmer and his entire town. A treasure lost for generations resurfaced in the hands of the least expected person, and what happened next will deeply move you. Subscribe now to the channel to follow this true story that proves that sometimes true treasures are hidden right before our eyes. Under the relentless sun of Nevada, Matthew Castleton wiped the sweat from his forehead while contemplating the small ranch he had just inherited from his grandfather. At 28, he never imagined he would end up managing these arid lands on the outskirts of Pine Creek. The property barely produced enough to subsist, and the accumulated debts threatened to swallow everything. "With this, we won't even make it to next month," he muttered, reviewing the account books worn by time. Mrs. Lucy, the elderly woman who had worked for his grandfather for decades, served him coffee while watching him with maternal concern. "Your grandfather? Old Herbert always said that solutions appear where you least expect them, son," she commented, arranging plates on the wooden table. "Perhaps you should look elsewhere." Matthew smiled with melancholy. He had abandoned his agronomy studies at Nevada State University to take charge of the ranch after his grandfather's passing, sacrificing dreams and friendships. Now the parcels of land dried up from lack of rain seemed to mock his decision. That afternoon, while reviewing the local newspaper in search of potential buyers for some of the livestock, an advertisement caught his attention. Grand auction of recovered vehicles. Opportunity prices. This Saturday at the Municipal Plaza. A vehicle, thought Matthew. The old tractor barely worked, and he needed something to transport the scarce products he managed to harvest. Perhaps he could find something cheap that would ease his situation a bit. Saturday arrived with a clear sky and scorching heat. The plaza buzzed with activity. Merchants, onlookers, and potential buyers mingled among the vehicles arranged in rows. Matthew walked among them with his hands in his pockets, aware that the few dollars he carried would hardly be enough for anything decent. In the farthest corner, almost hidden between two gleaming trucks, an old Volkswagen Beetle from the 60s seemed abandoned. Its faded blue paint, dents in the bodywork, and rust consuming the edges gave it a pitiful appearance. No one was paying attention to it. "This one's also up for auction," explained the attendant, noticing his interest. "It belonged to an old man who lived on the outskirts of Cherry Hill. No one claimed his belongings, and the city council sold it along with the little he had." Something about that battered automobile resonated within Matthew. Perhaps it was its abandoned appearance, so similar to how he had felt since his grandfather had left. Or maybe it was simple necessity. That would probably be the only vehicle he could afford. When the auction began, the best cars were quickly disputed. The trucks, modern sedans, even motorcycles. Everything disappeared while Matthew waited. Patiently. Finally, it was the old Volkswagen's turn. "We'll start with $200, announced the auctioneer with weariness, as if completing a mere formality. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single hand was raised. "Anyone offering $200 for this vehicle?" insisted the man, clearly anxious to finish. Matthew raised his hand timidly. $200 going once. A disguised laugh ran through the plaza. Some of the attendees looked at Matthew with mockery, others with pity. $200 going twice. "That boy must be desperate to buy that piece of junk," someone shouted from the back, provoking. More laughter. "And I sold for $200. Matthew paid the money and received the keys and the vehicle's documents. The laughter continued as he tried to start the engine, which coughed several times before igniting with a metallic roar. "Be careful it doesn't disintegrate on the way," shouted another spectator as Matthew left the plaza, his cheeks burning. With shame, but with a strange feeling of triumph. The return to the ranch was an odyssey. The engine failed constantly, forcing him to stop every few miles. Halfway there, on a secondary road bordered by cornfields, the car finally stopped completely. "Damn it," muttered Matthew, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. He got out of the vehicle and opened the hood. A cloud of smoke escaped, making him step back coughing. He didn't understand much about mechanics, but it was evident that he would need to tow it to the ranch. While waiting for the engine to cool down, he decided to check what was in the trunk. Maybe he would find some useful tools. Upon opening it, he was surprised by what he saw: several old and rusty boxes, dirty rags, and remnants of what appeared to be personal belongings. No one bothered to empty the car, he thought, rummaging through the objects. That's when he noticed it. A small improvised compartment on the side of the trunk, almost invisible under a dirty canvas. Curiosity got the better of prudence. With effort, Matthew managed to open the hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in a worn piece of cloth, he found a small metal chest. It was no bigger than a shoebox, but was sealed with a combination mechanism that looked very old. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, examining the object in the light of the setting sun. The sound of an approaching vehicle startled him. Quickly, he put the chest in his backpack and closed the trunk. An old cargo truck stopped next to him. "Problems, young man?" asked the driver, a middle-aged man with a kind smile. "It broke down," explained Matthew. "I need to take it to my ranch. It's a few miles from here." "I can tow you," offered the man. "My name's Ernest, by the way." During the journey, Matthew couldn't help thinking about the chest he had found. Its weight suggested it contained something important, and the fact that it was so carefully hidden aroused all kinds of speculation. Upon arriving at the ranch, Mrs. Lucy came out to receive them, surprised both by the dilapidated vehicle and the company. "Good heavens, Matthew. What did you bring?" "My new acquisition," he replied with a forced smile, while Ernest helped him push the car to the shed. That night, after thanking Ernest for his help and bidding him farewell with a modest dinner invitation, Matthew locked himself in the room that had been his grandfather's. He took the chest out of his backpack and placed it on the table. In the lamplight, it seemed even more mysterious. For hours, he tried to decipher the combination, trying dates, random numbers, anything that might open that enigmatic object. Frustration grew with each failed attempt. "There must be a way," he muttered to himself, closely observing the mechanism. Then he remembered the vehicle's documents. Perhaps there would be some clue there. He reviewed the old title deed and found the name of the original owner, Ethan West Davis, born on April 15th, 1935. 150435, he whispered, turning the numbers on the chest's mechanism. Nothing happened. Maybe? 350415. The sound of a click broke the silence of the room. With his heart racing, Matthew lifted the lid of the chest. What he found inside would change his life forever. The contents of the chest left Matthew breathless. Inside, he found several carefully folded yellowish documents, some contracts with official seals, old photographs, and a detailed map of the region. His hands trembled as he examined each paper in the dim light of the lamp. The first was a property deed, dated 1965, certifying Ethan West Davis as the rightful owner of a tract of land called Hope Valley, located between Pine Creek and Riverdale. According to the documents, that property encompassed more than 500 acres, including several springs and fertile lands. "Impossible," muttered Matthew, trying to comprehend the magnitude of that discovery. The map revealed that these lands bordered precisely with his small ranch, extending northward in a vast area that currently seemed abandoned or in dispute. Areas that he had always believed belonged to the state government or unknown landowners. Among the papers, a handwritten letter caught his attention. The handwriting, shaky but legible, told a story that froze Matthew's blood. "To whoever finds this chest, my name is Ethan West Davis. If you're reading this, it means my old Volkswagen has changed hands, and you were curious enough to discover my hiding place. I don't know how much time has passed since I wrote these lines, but I hope it's not too late. The lands described in these documents rightfully belong to me. I bought them with the fruit of my work as an engineer in New York City, dreaming of someday returning to my native Nevada. However, my own brother, Gerald, always coveted that fortune. When I fell seriously ill in 1980, he took advantage of my weakness to forge documents and appropriate part of my lands. I didn't have the strength to fight then, and retired to live modestly with the little I had left. I have hidden these original documents because I fear for my safety. Gerald has become a powerful man in the region, and his sons continue his legacy of ambition. But the truth must prevail someday. If you have found this, I legally transfer to you all rights over these properties. I only ask that you do justice. Under the old oak tree that marks the northern boundary of the land, you will find additional evidence that I have preserved for years. May God be with you. Ethan West Davis. The letter was dated just 3 years ago. Matthew was paralyzed, trying to process all that information. Could it be possible that, by a stroke of fate, he was now the legal owner of a fortune in land? The night advanced as he obsessively reviewed each document. Everything seemed authentic. Notary seals, official signatures, cadastral maps. If what he had in his hands was true, his life had just radically changed. Dawn surprised him asleep over the papers. Knocks on the door woke him with a start. "Matthew, are you all right, boy?" Mrs. Lucy's worried voice brought him back to reality. Yes, I'm coming," he responded, hastily putting the documents back in the chest. During breakfast, Matthew remained silent, lost in his thoughts. The old woman observed him with curiosity but respected his silence. Finally, he made a decision. "Mrs. Lucy, I need to go to Reno today," he announced, standing up. "I'll be back in the afternoon." "Did something happen with that old car you bought?" "You could say that," he replied enigmatically. In Reno, Matthew headed directly to the public property registry. With nervousness, he presented the documents to a middle-aged official named James Maxwell, who attended to him with a mixture of boredom and curiosity. "Where did you get these papers?" asked James, adjusting his glasses while examining the deeds with growing interest. "I found them among a relative's belongings," lied Matthew. "I'd like to verify if they have any validity." James typed information into his computer, consulted old records, and finally looked at Matthew with a surprised expression. "These documents seem authentic," he explained. "The Hope Valley property appears in our records, but it has been in an irregular situation for decades. There was a family conflict that was never fully resolved. And who figures as the current owner?" "Technically, it's still in Ethan West Davis's name. The transfer that supposedly occurred in the 80s was never completed. There's a note about an unfinished process." Matthew's heart was beating hard. And what would this mean for someone who had the original documents and, let's say, had legally acquired Ethan West's possessions? James looked at him intently. "It would mean they would have grounds to claim the property. But I warn you, it's legally swampy terrain. You would need a good lawyer." Leaving the registry, Matthew felt like he was walking on clouds. The streets of Reno, with their modern architecture and vibrant lights, now seemed the setting of a dream. Without thinking too much, he headed to the law firm he had seen upon arrival, Harrison and Associates. The receptionist looked at him skeptically when he asked to speak with a lawyer without an appointment, but his insistence got him 15 minutes with attorney Richard Harrison, an older man who seemed about to retire. "I have little time." "Young man," warned the lawyer, pointing to the wall clock. "Be brief." Matthew explained his situation, omitting certain details, such as finding the chest in the car. He simply mentioned that he had legally acquired Ethan West's possessions and had found documents suggesting ownership of valuable lands. Attorney Harrison, initially uninterested, changed his expression as Matthew spoke. When he saw the documents that the young man showed him, his eyes widened in astonishment. "Do you know what you have here?" he asked, examining the deeds with almost reverent attention. "These lands are extremely valuable. The area has been greatly revalued in recent decades." "Really?" Matthew tried to contain his excitement. "The West family," murmured the lawyer, more to himself than to Matthew. "Now I understand. Gerald West is currently one of the most powerful businessmen in the region. His son, Frank West, runs the largest real estate consortium in Reno." A chill ran down Matthew's spine. Ethan's letter mentioned his brother Gerald and his ambitious sons. Apparently, that family had built an empire on usurped lands. "Attorney, do you think I would have any chance of claiming the property?" The elderly lawyer looked at him intently for several seconds before answering. "Yes, but you would face very powerful adversaries." The West family has influence at all levels of the state government. He paused. However, with the original documents and an adequate strategy, it could work. Besides, I retire in 2 months, and I would love to end my career with a case like this. I've always detested abusers who use their power to take advantage of the weak. Matthew left the office with a mixture of hope and fear. Attorney Harrison had agreed to represent him, but warned him to prepare for a legal battle that could be long and dangerous. Back at the ranch, Matthew decided he needed to investigate more before proceeding. Following the directions in Ethan's letter, he rode to the northern boundary of his property. Indeed, a solitary old oak tree stood majestically on the hill. He dismounted and began to examine the surroundings. There were no clear indications of where what Ethan had hidden might be. After almost an hour of fruitless search, he noticed something peculiar. One of the large roots of the tree seemed to have been cut and then put back in place. With effort, he managed to move the section of root, revealing a hole in the ground. Inside, protected by a hermetically sealed metal box, he found a folder with more documents and, surprisingly, a notebook of detailed annotations made by Ethan over the years documenting his brother's illegal maneuvers. There were also photographs of Gerald West meeting with officials, notes about bribes, and even copies of falsified documents with precise indications of the alterations made. It was a treasure trove of evidence patiently accumulated by a man who hoped that someday justice would be done. But what really captured Matthew's attention were the hydrological studies that Ethan had conducted decades ago. The springs he mentioned were not simple water sources, but access to an enormous underground aquifer that could supply the entire region, increasingly affected by prolonged droughts. Now he understood why those lands were so coveted. In an area where water was becoming scarcer every day, controlling that resource was equivalent to possessing an incalculable treasure. Upon returning to the ranch with his new discovery, he found a luxurious car parked at the entrance. Her man in his 40s, dressed in an impeccable suit, was conversing with Mrs. Lucy in the yard. "Ah, there he is," exclaimed the old woman upon seeing him. "Mr. Matthew, this gentleman has come looking for you. He says it's urgent." The man turned to him with a calculating smile. "Frank West," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Castleton. I have a proposal that might interest you enormously." Matthew felt the world stopping around him. Before him stood Gerald West's son, the heir to the empire built with lands stolen from Ethan. How had he found out so quickly about his investigations? "How can I help you?" he asked with feigned innocence, hiding the folder he carried under his arm. Frank West widened his smile. "I've come to talk to you about your future, Mr. Castleton, and about the price that every decision in this life carries." The calculating smile of Frank West contrasted with the tension Matthew felt in every muscle of his body. Mrs. Lucy, perceiving the discomfort in the atmosphere, discreetly retreated to the kitchen, but not without first casting a concerned look at Matthew. "Let's go inside," suggested Matthew, trying to maintain his composure while hiding the folder recently recovered from the oak tree. Already in the living room of the modest ranch, Frank observed the place with barely disguised disdain, adjusting his expensive watch as he took a seat. "I'll get straight to the point, Mr. Castleton," he began, elegantly crossing his legs. "It has come to my attention that you're investigating certain lands north of your property, lands that, coincidentally, have been part of my family's heritage for decades." Matthew kept his face impassive. "And how exactly did that come to your ears, Mr. West?" Frank let out a brief laugh. "Reno is a small city. News flies, especially when someone visits the public registry asking questions about such significant properties." "I understand," replied Matthew. "And what proposal have you come to make me?" "Simple, I want to buy your ranch. I'm offering you 10 times its market value in cash." Frank took an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. "Here's a check as an advance. You would receive the rest upon signing the documents tomorrow." Matthew looked at the check without touching it. The amount was indeed impressive, much more than he had ever dreamed of possessing. "That's very generous," he commented. "May I ask what interest you have in a small, almost unproductive ranch like mine?" Frank shrugged with studied indifference. "Expansion, diversification, call it what you will. My company has important projects for this area. Projects related to the underground aquifer, perhaps? The words left Matthew's mouth before he could contain them. Frank's face tensed momentarily, but he quickly recovered his professional smile. I see you're well informed. Indeed, we're planning a development that would take advantage of the area's water resources, a project that would benefit the entire community. Curious, replied Matthew, gaining confidence. Because as I understand, those resources legally belong to the Hope Valley lands. A heavy silence settled in the room. Frank's expression visibly hardened. Young Castleton, I'll be frank with you, he finally said, leaning forward. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I advise you to accept my offer and forget about Hope Valley. Those lands have an owner, and any documents you may have found have no validity whatsoever. Even the original documents signed by your Uncle Ethan? Asked Matthew, carefully observing his visitor's reaction. Frank paled. How do you know? Let's say fate puts things in the hands of those who should have them, replied Matthew, standing up. I appreciate your offer, Mr. West, but I'm afraid I must decline it. This ranch belonged to my grandfather, and I intend to keep it. Frank also stood up, all pretense of friendliness abandoned. You're making a serious mistake, Castleton. You don't know who you're messing with. On the contrary, I think I know perfectly well, replied Matthew, holding his adversary's gaze. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. When Frank West's luxurious car disappeared in the distance, Matthew felt his legs weaken. He collapsed into a chair, breathing deeply. Are you okay, son? Asked Mrs. Lucy, entering cautiously. That man, began Matthew, but he interrupted himself. He decided it was better not to involve the old woman in the dangerous game he had gotten into. It's nothing, he smiled, regaining his composure. Just business. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Matthew and Attorney Harrison meticulously prepared their case, organizing the original documents, the evidence from the oak tree, and all the additional information they could gather about the West family's maneuvers. We must act quickly, warned the lawyer during one of their meetings. Frank West has begun to mobilize influences. They will try to block any claim before it reaches the courts. A week after Frank's visit, Matthew was returning from Reno when he noticed something strange at his ranch. Several trucks were parked at the entrance, and men in official uniforms seemed to be conducting some kind of inspection. What's happening here? He asked, hastily dismounting from his horse. A man with a clipboard approached. Sanitary inspection, he explained dryly. We've received complaints about possible water contamination and animal mistreatment on this property. Contamination? Mistreatment? That's absurd, protested Matthew. We're just following orders, replied the official, handing him an official notification. You must suspend all your agricultural activities until the investigation is completed. Matthew immediately understood what was happening. It was Frank West's first move, paralyzing his ranch with false accusations to pressure him economically. That night, while discussing the situation with Attorney Harrison by phone, a noise outside alerted Matthew. Looking out, he saw with horror that someone had painted threats on the exterior wall of the ranch. The intimidations are a good sign, commented the lawyer with surprising calmness. It means they're scared. Tomorrow we'll file our formal property recognition claim. I already have everything prepared. The next day, the local newspapers published the news in a small box. Young farmer claims huge tracts of land from West family. The case was beginning to attract attention. Frank West's response was not long in coming. Through his lawyers, he filed a lawsuit against Matthew for document forgery and slander, demanding a millionaire compensation. It was to be expected, commented Attorney Harrison without flinching. Now they'll try to publicly discredit you. Indeed, in the following days, articles appeared in the local press describing Matthew as an opportunist trying to scam a respectable business family. Some neighbors in the community began to look at him with distrust. What Frank West didn't expect was Matthew's determination and Attorney Harrison's experience. The old lawyer, with his connections forged during decades of professional practice, managed to get a judge to order the protection of all original documents and an independent expert assessment of their authenticity. The first setback for the Wests came when experts confirmed that the signatures on Ethan's documents were authentic and that the deeds showed no signs of manipulation. The community began to divide. While some continued to believe the official version of the powerful Wests, others began to sympathize with the young rancher who defied the system. A month after the start of the process, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman named Dorothy Miller presented herself at Attorney Harrison's office, requesting to urgently speak with Matthew. "I worked as a housekeeper for Mr. Ethan for 30 years, explained the woman, her voice trembling with age. "I always knew what his brother Gerald did to him, but I was afraid to speak. Now that I see someone is fighting to do justice, I want to tell what I know." Dorothy's testimony proved devastating for the West family. The elderly woman not only corroborated the version of events described in Ethan's documents, but provided additional details about how Gerald had taken advantage of his brother's illness to appropriate his lands through falsified documents. "Mr. Ethan always knew that someday the truth would come to light," concluded the elderly woman. "That's why he kept those papers as his most precious treasure." As the case progressed, the pressure on Matthew increased. Sanitary inspections at his ranch multiplied, threats became more explicit, and on a couple of occasions he had to face sabotage attempts on his crops. But Matthew was not alone. Mrs. Lucy, Ernest, and other neighbors who had witnessed the arrogance of the Wests for years began to openly support him. The story of the young man who had found historical documents in an old auction car captured the popular imagination. The turning point came when a former employee of the public registry, now retired, confirmed that he had personally witnessed how Gerald West had manipulated property records decades ago, bribing officials to ignore irregularities in the transfers. Frank West's strategy then changed radically. One morning, his luxurious car reappeared at the entrance to Matthew's ranch. "I've come to negotiate," he announced without preamble when Matthew came out to receive him. "I'm willing to publicly acknowledge that part of the Hope Valley lands could legitimately belong to you. We can reach an agreement beneficial to both." Matthew smiled serenely. "I'm afraid it's too late for negotiations, Mr. West. The judge will issue a ruling next week, and according to my lawyer, the prospects are very favorable for my case." Frank lost his composure. "You're a fool. Do you think a nobody like you can challenge my family? We can still make you disappear, you and your damned documents." "Are you threatening me, Mr. West?" Matthew asked calmly. "Because I happen to be recording this conversation, and my lawyer would be very interested in hearing it." Frank paled, looked around nervously, and returned to his car without saying goodbye. The judicial ruling, finally issued 3 months after the start of the process, shocked the Reno community. The judge not only recognized Matthew as the legitimate owner of the Hope Valley lands, based on the original documents and multiple testimonies, but ordered an investigation into the fraudulent activities of the West family over decades. "We did it, boy," exclaimed Attorney Harrison, effusively hugging Matthew in the courthouse corridors. "Justice after so many years." The following months completely transformed Matthew's life. From a young rancher on the verge of bankruptcy, he became the owner of one of the most valuable extensions of land in the region. The underground aquifer that Frank West so coveted came under his control. But Matthew didn't forget his origins or his grandfather's lessons. Instead of exploiting the resource for exclusively personal benefit, he created the Herbert Castleton Foundation in honor of his grandfather, dedicated to developing sustainable irrigation systems for small farmers in the area. "Water should not be a privilege, but a right," he declared during the inauguration of the first community irrigation system, financed with profits from Hope Valley. The fall of the West family was as spectacular as its rise had been. Investigations derived from the case uncovered decades of corruption, misappropriation, and bribes. Gerald West, now elderly, saw how the empire he had built with fraudulent methods crumbled. Frank, facing multiple legal accusations, had to leave the country. A year after the historic ruling, Matthew decided to make one last visit to Old Creek, the small settlement where Ethan West had lived in his final years. There he found the modest house where the old man had spent his final days. Resigned but never defeated, trusting that someday someone would find his hidden treasure and do justice. In the local cemetery, in front of Ethan's simple grave, Matthew placed a bouquet of flowers and allowed himself a moment of reflection. Fate had placed in his hands, through an old car despised by everyone, the opportunity to correct a historical injustice. "Thank you," he whispered, feeling that somehow Ethan could hear him. Returning to the ranch that afternoon, Matthew contemplated the old Volkswagen that remained in the shed, now restored as a permanent reminder of how it had all begun. The car that everyone had considered a useless piece of junk had changed not only his personal destiny, but that of an entire community. Mrs. Lucy approached, carrying a tray with freshly made coffee. "Your grandfather would be very proud," commented the old woman, following Matthew's gaze toward the car. "He always said that truth and justice find their way no matter how long the journey." Matthew smiled, remembering the similar words his grandfather used to repeat. He was right, and sometimes that path begins in the most unexpected place. As the sun set over the now prosperous fields of Hope Valley, Matthew understood that his adventure had not ended. It was, in reality, just the beginning of a new stage, a stage in which the secrets of the past had opened the doors to a future of infinite possibilities. The old car, a silent witness to his transformation, shone with the last rays of the sunset. It was no longer an object of mockery, but a symbol of hope and redemption, because sometimes the most valuable treasures are found where no one bothers to look. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Matthew and the secret of the old car has moved you. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, justice, and unexpected turns of fate. And remember, sometimes our greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Have you lived any experience where something apparently worthless turned out to be a treasure? We await you in the comments.